I am griot historian Jumal Okeyo Jumal. The book, African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Spoiler alert, it is reality. Dr. Chicana Diop, with earned doctorates ranging from anthropology, Egyptology, to chemistry and physics, challenged the established pseudo-science eugenic narrative that ancient Egyptian was a non-African Caucasian civilization. Dr. Diop, with copious facts and evidence compounded in his books, proved without question that ancient Egypt was founded and populated by an indigenous Black African civilization. Dr. Diop's book was so powerful and well-researched that it shook the academic Egyptology community to its foundation, exposing the false historical narrative and introducing truth, facts, and reality. As did Dr. Diop, I will begin with the classics, the ancient Greeks and the father of Western civilization and history, Herodotus. Herodotus. Given the name Father of History by Roman Senator Cicero, he was born in approximately 480 BCE in the Greek city of Halicarnassus. He traveled extensively and earned a good living drawing large crowds to hear his stories about far-off places and his exploits. The maps. The map is circa about 480 BCE and was the world map. This is the entire world in ancient Greece. And you'll also note at the south, you'll see where it listed as Ethiopia. Ethiopia is what the entire continent was known for at that time.
Even the South Atlantic was known as the Ethiopian Ocean.
And note, as we look at the northwest region of the 430 BCE ancient Greek map, you observe that the British Isles are yet to be discovered in an unexplored region. In 450 BCE, Herodotus would visit Egypt, traveling the Nile, noting the customs of the Egyptians, foods, garments, their homes, and their appearance. This is just one of the several passages in his book, The Histories, in which he writes about the Egyptians. It is undoubtedly a fact that the Caucasians are of Egyptian descent. I found that the Caucasians remembered the Egyptians far more distinctly than the Egyptians remembered them. The Egyptians did, however, say that they thought the original Caucasians were from Sesostris' army. My own idea on the subject was based on the fact that they have black skin and woolly hair, not that that amounts to much, other nations have the same. And second, and more especially, on the fact that Caucasians, Egyptians, and Ethiopians are the only races which come from ancient times have practiced circumcision. The question begged to be asked, where is Kochi? Today it is a semi-autonomous region of Abkhazia, located on the east coast of the Black Sea between the countries of Georgia and Russia. Yes, there are villages in Abkhazia where once called Black Russians reside, and whether their history spans 200 years or goes back 2,500 years would be for another video. Herodotus wasn't the only classical writer to refer to the blackness of the Egyptians. Greek and Roman writers Strabo, Plutarch, Diodorus of Sicily, Aeschylus, Aristotle, all in passing would mention the black appearance of the Egyptians. Awakening out of the fog of the Dark Ages, the 17th and 18th centuries, Europeans began traveling in the Ottoman Empire with the destination being Egypt, land of wonders, massive pyramids, and the giant Ethiopian head growing out of the desert sand. In 1610, George Sandys, a distinguished poet and traveler, journeyed to Egypt, and his drawings and descriptions became a sensation, starting a flood of Europeans, which included tourists and grave robbers traveling to the Nile River Valley. Sandy's description of an ancient black civilization on the Nile was validated by other travelers in the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries, including Count Constantine de Volney of France.
In 1787, Count de Volney visits Egypt. The Egyptians whose civilization is greatly admired in Europe were not white. I visited the Sphinx, and on seeing that head, typically Negro in all its features, it's clear ancient Egyptians were born Negroes of the same type as all native-born Africans. De Volney continues. This race of black men, today our slave and the object of our ridicule scorn, are the very people which we owe our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech. Just imagine, my countrymen, who call themselves the greatest friends of liberty and humanity, approve of the most barbarous slavery and question whether black men have the same intelligence as white.
Levantinon, known as one of the finest artists in France, his drawings were like a photo 30 years before the advent of the camera. He joined Napoleon's Commission on Arts and Science as they surveyed the sites of ancient Egypt. He arrived on the Giza Plateau in 1799 and stood stoically staring at the giant Ethiopian head growing out of the desert sand, and he began writing what his eyes gazed upon.
Its proportions are colossal. The outline is pure and graceful. The expression of the head is mild, gracious, and tranquil. The character is African, but the mouth, the lips of which are thick, has a softness and delicacy of execution truly admirable. It seems real life and flesh. Art must have been at a high pitch when this monument was executed. Justice has been rendered to the fine simplicity and character of nature, which is displayed in this figure.
The Rosetta Stone is a 4x3-foot stele found in rubble, written in 3 languages: hieroglyphics, Demonic, which was a local Egyptian dialect, and Greek. Champollion, a linguist versed in the Coptic language, would win the Massey Prize in 1822, deciphering the Rosetta Stone. Champollion deciphered the Rosetta Stone in 1822, ushering in a torrent of Egypt mania in Europe. He would travel to Egypt in 1828-1830, there recording the sites from Egyptian's antiquity.
The first tribes that inhabited Egypt, that is the Nile Valley between Syene, Aswan, and the sea, came from Abyssinia and southern Nubia, Senna. The ancient Egyptians belonged to a people quite similar to the present-day inhabitants of Nubia. Jean-François Champollion, 1828.
"19th century slavery and colonialism bursts a new hegemony of North America and Western Europe. The new arrivals erased ancient Africa from history, inserting themselves as the creators of ancient Egyptian civilization."
When German philosopher George Wilhelm Hegel wrote, "Africa has no historical part of the world," he laid the foundation for a political narrative that would span the next 150 years, methodically erasing Africa from history.
Africa has no history and did not contribute to anything that mankind enjoyed. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. From Hegel's perspective, Africa is said to be unhistorical, underdeveloped spirits still involved in the conditions of mere nature, devoid of morality, religions, and political constitution. To hence, He holds that there is a justification for Europe's enslavement and colonization of Africa. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
Flinders Petrie would create the archaeology of racism. Colleagues Petrie and Sir Francis Galton were disciples of Darwin's human evolution theory, with the apex of the pyramid occupied by the Nordic Caucasians. Galton would coin the term eugenics in 1881, and Petrie would lead archaeology, anthropology, and Egyptology down the unscientific rabbit hole of eugenics in an effort to find a Nordic origin of ancient Egypt. Galton and Petrie would introduce biometrics, meticulously measuring skulls, thousands of skulls from Upper Egypt, to validate the Nordic claim that they were the founders of pharaonic Egypt. Sir Francis Galton would also state that his research confirms that intelligence is determined by skull shape and size. He claimed that his formula measured aesthetics, noting that the Caucasian profile is most beautiful, most pleasing, with perfect angle, while the African profile is unsightly and awkward.
The Dynastic Race Theory by Flinders Petrie. The theory holds that the earliest roots of the ancient Egyptian dynastic civilization were imported by a technologically superior race of invaders from Mesopotamia, who then founded the first dynasty and brought culture to the indigenous population of the Nile Valley.
While the Petries were blatantly stealing African history, the African continent was being hacked into pieces by Europeans with no regard for African peoples and families. It was called the Berlin Conference on Africa, 1884, and of course, no Africans were invited. Cecil Rhodes, later of Rhodes Scholarship fame, subscribed to eugenics, international survival of the fittest. The superior nations had a right to take what they want, and with Britain at the pinnacle of those nations, they could take it all. We're taking it all, from Cape to Cairo. Demonstrating the callousness of the conference, Britain insisted on keeping their copper mine, but it was in the middle of French Senegal, so they cut a new nation from the port to the mine, following the Gambia River, and named the country Gambia. Dr. James Henry Breasted. Dr. James Henry Breasted was America's first Egyptologist. He received his PhD in Egyptology from the University of Berlin in 1894. It was the most prestigious institution hosting the subject. Breasted would chair the Egyptology department at Chicago University and eventually be chairman of the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. According to Breasted, Egypt was the greatest of all ancient civilizations. It was in another class from Mesopotamia. However, like Petrie, he was resolute that ancient Egypt was a white civilization from its beginning. People of Egypt were not black Africans, but were actually dark-skinned Caucasians. According to Breasted, some of the dark-skinned Caucasians even had African facial features with body types, but were still included as dark-skinned Caucasians. Unfit by ages of tropical life for any effective inclusion with the white race, the Negroid and Negroid people remain without any influence on the development of civilization. James Henry Breasted, 1926, Dean of American Egyptology. Breasted believed that living in the heat and humidity of the tropics diminishes intellectual development in tropical peoples. Eugenics. The pseudo-science was now the wannabe, in vogue, cutting-edge thinking of both many politicians and academics. Dr. Breasted was the preeminent, most sought-after historian in the country, yet he abandons the science of history in favor of a political narrative, eugenics. According to Breasted, the great white race with its Nordic type at the top is the pinnacle of human evolution. James Breasted's book, Ancient Times, A History of the Early World, became standard in most U.S. high school classrooms. Students learned of the Fertile Crescent, a term created by Breasted and the University of Chicago, moving Egypt out of Africa and making it part of the Near East or the Middle East, something other than Africa. Egypt disappears from Africa. When I was in school, going to the library to find a book on ancient Egypt, I wouldn't find it in Africa. You'd find it shelved under the Middle East or Near East or Oriental Studies. John D. Rockefeller Jr., Mr. Jr., became an ardent supporter of Dr. Breasted and his Oriental Institute, Chicago University. Rockefeller was the perfect benefactor. He offered $10 million to Cairo to build a new museum, but it was turned down partly because Breasted wanted total control of the museum when it was completed. Mr. Jr. donated $5 million to the Oriental Institute for college tuition or funds for publishing students who find ancient Egypt to be white. Dr. James Breasted, historian and anthropologist, became Time Magazine Man of the Year 1931. Dr. Arnold J. Toynbee.
On the south of the northwest quadrant lay the teeming black world of Africa, separated from the great white race by an impassable desert barrier, the Sahara, which forms so large a part of the southern flatlands. Thus isolated and at the same time unfitted by ages of tropical life for any effective intrusion among the white race, the Negro, and Negroid peoples remained without any influence on the development of early civilization. We may then exclude both of these external races, the straight-haired, round-headed, yellow-skinned Mongoloids on the east, and the woolly-haired, long-headed, dark-skinned Negroids on the south, from any share in the origins or subsequent development of civilization. The black race has not helped to create any civilization, while the great white Nordic race has created 9. Arnold J. Toynbee.
Arnold Toynbee, Time Magazine Man of the Year, 1947. In 1922, Howard Carter uncovers King Tut's tomb. Problem for eugenics. King Tut shows every indication of being a black African. Dr. Charles G. Seligman, ethnologist and anthropologist. Races of Africa, C.G. Siegelman.
Black Caucasians, Siegelman's Hamite hypothesis. Nilotic peoples occupy the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, ancient Egypt, and the pastoral peoples of the Nile Valley are dark-complected Caucasians. The true Negro are Bantu that occupy western southern Africa with Bushmen and Hottentot. Dr. Siegelman's Bantu, True Negro. Full everted lips, flat nose, kinky hair, rounded cheeks, and pronounced pragmatic jaw. Agricultural. Dr. Siegelman's Nilotic Black Caucasians. Tall, slender, reddish dark brown complexion, narrow nose, hair spiral, not kinky. No prognatic jaw, pastoral, spindled legs.
Today, the Nilotic people would be those occupying Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Fragmenting colonized people by language, religion, and culture is straight out of the British colonial playbook. They exacerbate the differences, creating animosity between groups, while the colonizer steals the natural resources and appropriates history and culture. Mr. Seligman writes derisively about full lips and magnetic jaw. This is only found in the true Negro, the Bantu. And of course, that's the group he puts on the lowest rung. His book, Races of Africa, first printed in 1930, was still in print in 1977 and can still be found in high school classrooms today. Perhaps Mr. Seligman failed to take notice of his surroundings. If so, he would have realized that the Sphinx has a strong prognatic jaw, meaning that, according to his own writing, he would be a true Negro of Bantu, which would also mean that the civilization that built it was Bantu. Pharaoh Cheikh of the 4th dynasty, 2500 BCE, like many Africans, doesn't have a prognatic jaw. The Great Sphinx does. Cheikh isn't the model for the Sphinx. The New York City Police Forensic Department, with a side-by-side drawing, reached the same conclusion. This is not the guy. The Great Sphinx is from a much older time. Although Sir Wallace Budge received funds from the Oriental Institute, he didn't follow that narrative. He maintained the science of history. He traveled the Upper Nile, Nubia, today's Sudan, and South Sudan. He observed their practices, especially religion and culture.
There is no doubt that the beliefs examined in ancient Egypt are of indigenous origin, practiced by people who live on the great rivers of East, West, and Central Africa. If we examine the religions of modern African peoples, we find that the beliefs are almost identical with those of ancient Egyptians. As they are not derived from the Egyptians, it follows that they are the natural product of the religious mind of the natives of certain parts of Africa. Osiris and the Egyptian Resurrection, 1911.
Bulge's beliefs of the origin of Egyptian religions was regarded by his colleagues as impossible, since all but a few followed Flanders Petrie. Petrie was a dedicated follower of the pseudo-science of eugenics. Bulge and Petrie thus clashed on the mentioned issue. The Book of the Dead, or Book of Emerging Forth into Light, was first published by Bulge in 1894, and it is a group of funeral prayers. These prayers, or magical sayings, are given to Osiris, Lord of the underworld, to ensure your passage into the next life. Along with the magical sayings and prayers, you must answer to Lord Osiris 43 negative confessions. Here's a 27 sample of the 43. Numerous African nations today, like ancient Egypt, practice a matrilineal system, meaning that the lineage and inheritance are traced through the group's female member, and children are part of the mother's kinship group. Siblings, say brother and sister, the sister's child is first in line, and the brother is obligated to assist in raising his sister's child, because no matter where sister conceives, her offspring for certain carries the brother's blood. The brother is always known as Baba Nkubwa, or the Big Father. Making it simple, you and your sister from the same womb, your sister's child with scientific certainty has your blood. Your child doesn't quite have the same scientific certainty. The winged goddess Isis, mother, daughter, sister, and wife of Osiris, was the most revered deity in Egypt. Oracles to Isis were numerous and crossed many nations. The image of Isis as the Blessed Mother and Child remains with us today, although her appearance has been altered. Along with religion and cultural connections, Bulge also found the sport of wrestling, often depicted on the reliefs in ancient Egypt, still very popular in Sudan, Nubia today. The sports page, ancient Egypt.
South of Khartoum. And this is the traditional school. The wrestlers cover themselves with opium, and it's on.
Some that claim that Egyptian women are always portrayed as yellow or white. At the 1974 UNESCO Symposium, Dr. Diop introduced drawings and paintings of ancient Egyptian women. What hair would match this type of comb? Recent discoveries have persuaded many remaining Eurocentric Egyptologists that black Africans were a part of ancient Egypt, but they were as servants and slaves. Wrong. From 3200 BCE to 550 BCE, black Africans were a part of the ruling class and royal dynasties. Notice the surprise when Professor Alejandro Jimenez unwraps a newly discovered royal class mummy of the 8th dynasty that he assumed would be Mediterranean type.
Dan has one more surprise for Alejandro. Shammai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shammai has a Nubian feature, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shammai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia.
The Nile River Valley, a very beautiful civilization. Where did it all begin? In 1958, archaeologists on a rock cropping on the mountains in Libya found a package wrapped in antelope hide and covered with leaves. When opened, it was a mummified body of a 2.5-year-old black boy buried over 5,500 years ago. The young boy was part of a Saharan civilization that mummified its dead with the same skill that we would find in ancient Egypt 1,500 years later. Civilization would also leave petrographs, rock paintings of themselves and animals that could actually survive on a green Sahara. What proved to be just as significant, the civilization left shards of pottery. As the Sahara Desert began to dry of thirst, civilizations had to move to find more permanent water, and one destination was Lake Chad. At Lake Chad were found the same style petrograph rock drawings as the Atticus Mountains and the Black Mummy. Also, pottery found at the Black Mummy site were found at Lake Chad and sites on the Upper Nile nearly 1,500 years before Pharaonic Egypt. Evidence shows that the ancient Egyptian civilization came together and grew out of the African civilizations that once occupied the Green Sahara. Called the Rape of the Nile, during the Egypt mania of the 19th century, anything and everything that could be ripped out was looted or stolen and hauled away. Most of the most iconic pieces of ancient Egypt are located in museums across Europe and North America. Word was a local Egyptian official asked about the plunder and robbery, and British told him, "We'll give you half of what we steal." At the Louvre in Paris, Akhenaten, the 18th dynasty. Then there is Zodiac. Osiris in the Grotto Louvre in Paris. The original Trinity, Osiris, Horus, and Isis. At the British Museum, you'll find the Rosetta Stone. The new museum in Berlin. Queen Tai and a contemporary relative. The bust of Nefertiti was found in 1912 and it became an international sensation. Nefertiti, housed at the News Museum. The Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy, has the largest collection outside of Cairo, Egypt. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York City. Egyptologists, equipped with a ferocious erudition, have committed their well-known crime against science by becoming guilty of a deliberate falsification of history and humanity. Dr. Chicana Diop. In the 1974 UNESCO Symposium, Dr. Diop would explode into the political narrative of a Caucasian ancient Egypt like a hypersonic missile. At the 1974 UNESCO Conference on Egyptology, a fatal blow was dealt to the political narrative claiming a Caucasian ancient Egypt. Two African scholars, Dr. Chicana Diop and Theophile Obenga, with rigorous scientific evidence, dismantled 18 world-renowned Egyptologists who had received detailed instructions but came to the conference woefully unprepared. The African duo proved in 11 different categories that ancient Egyptians were indigenous black Africans. The question of what ethnicity were the ancient Egyptians, that was resolved at the historic International Cairo Symposium, January-February 1974. The conclusion of the official UNESCO report, although a preparatory working paper sent out by UNESCO gave particulars what was desired, not all participants had prepared communications comparable with the painstakingly researched contributions of Professors Chicana Diop and Obenga. There was consequently a real lack of balance in the discussion. In layman's terms, Chicana Diop and Theophile Obenga gave out an important academic spanking on a world stage. The separation of Egypt from Africa beginning nearly 2 centuries ago resulted from Egyptologists, historians, and anthropologists interpreting archaeological finds and physical remains through the prism blurred by the racism of the time. These views have persisted to this day despite overwhelming evidence that refutes them. The most egregious and flagrant proliferator of historical lies and untruths, politically deep blue and woke Hollywood. For over 115 years of Hollywood movie making, the ancient Egyptians are always portrayed with Caucasian acting, even as scientific evidence proves with certainty this portrayal to be false. This continued retelling of the lie reaches tens of millions across the globe, while Hollywood pretends deafness, sticks its collective head in the sand or in the mud or in the cesspool of deceit. In Hollywood, the false portrayal of ancient Egyptian must be the holy grail, and if you touch it, it's the third rail. Eric von Daniken's book, Chariots of the God, listed as non-fiction, was a 1968 bestseller with over 70 million copies sold to date. His hypothesis that indigenous people lacked the necessities and technology to build monuments or create religions, they needed help from aliens, extraterrestrials, space travelers, and for some, space travelers was a lot more palatable than, well, I'll just leave it there. As Hollywood continues to exist in a false reality of its own making, we can go old school. New York, New York. December 2021, the Met Museum opened an ongoing exhibit, The African Origin of Civilization. Dr. Chicana Diop, Mr. Senegal, Mr. Africa. San Francisco State University, April 7, 1977.
Dr. Harold Varner, KDIA Radio. Dear Harold, this is to introduce
Okeyo Jumal.
He is engaged in important historical research about Africa and Afro-Americans. As with so many of the scholars in this neglected area, the search for him has been a labor of love. I am, as you know, also involved in research in this important area. I have found Mr. Jumal's work to be substantive, exciting, and an important resource to me. We have exchanged rare bibliographical references. More than that, he has the perspective to interpret the materials which he has found. Jumal would add a rich dimension to inner vision. Love and peace. Asa G. Hilliard, Dean, School of Education.